Welcome back to Cut to the Chase, a podcast by Cempaka Cut, a filmmaking society of Cempaka International Schools. Today we're going to do something special. We're going to start off the second season by kicking off a new episode, which we're going to be talking about something really special. Before that, this marks a few major changes from the old season, where we used to focus on more like stuff, discussing different topics such as e-learning. With our previous co-host Abner Go is now going to be working on another part of the project, but he's no longer going to be hosting. But I am so excited to be here once again for all you amazing, lovely people. And actually, in fact, I'm going to be joined by another great co-host here, Zerlynde, who is going to just explain a little bit about herself, get to know you all a little bit better. And then after that, we are going to know more with the episode, and then we can get started right away. So without further ado, let's invite a new host, Zerlynde, talk about themselves and the podcast episode. Yeah.
Okay, so some of you might know me. My name is Zerlynde. I have been an active member of Cempaka Cut since the beginning of the club, like since it was founded. And I really like Harry Potter and I really enjoy writing and reading. That's basically all you need to know for me for now. Right now, what we're going to be doing for this season is we're going to move into more COVID related topics, but it's not going to be like, like your traditional how are we going to prevent this and stuff like that, right? We're going to be talking more about like alternate topics that people usually think about, but like not a lot of people would talk about like as a podcast. So for example, we're going to be debunking conspiracy theories and like stuff like that, right? And after that, we're going to move on to a few more personal topics for us, or like topics that we think you guys would find interesting. And finally, for our final episode, which would be episode 6, we're just going to talk about, the origins of Cempaka Cut and how the club started first, right? So in between each episode, we're also going to have special episodes that we'll post on Instagram, so stay tuned for that. Now back to you, Umar.
Yeah, don't worry. I know all of you are thinking, COVID-19, boring. Like, it's been a year. We all know about washing our hands. We all know about wearing a mask. We all know about social distancing and using sanitizer. No. This is not what it's going to be about. We're going to be doing more like unique takes on certain things. We're going to be looking at things from like different perspectives that people don't usually consider, but also like interesting topics.
Yeah.
We're not going to like give you information that you can easily read off from any website. It's going to be more like qualitative discussions for things that you just can't represent on like graphs, for example. Things that you can actually discuss, not whether like COVID-19 is like real or not. Those kind of things we know already. So specifically for today, we're going to be talking about why cases are going up, because I think this is something that most people are like quite trying to find like the core of. We're not going to have the perfect answers, but we're going to look at it from 3 different angles. Number 1, we're going to talk about how like certain SOPs and the enforcement of them are not at a level which is adequate to ensure that COVID-19 is kept at an all-time low. Secondly, we're going to talk about the emergence of festivals within this period, why it's something that's quite harmful. Thirdly, we're just going to talk about how a mindset and culture shift over the past year has meant that people are being desensitized to COVID-19, and this allows them to like want to do more things that they wouldn't have done at the start of the year. So before that, let's just talk about the first thing. We're going to talk about how inadequate SOPs and the enforcement of these things are. So, do you have any thoughts about these things and why it's necessarily quite harmful?
Yeah, I think that like before we get into SOPs, right? I think like something that has like contributed greatly to the great like spike in cases now, I think is a lot about these huge super spreaders and like huge clusters of migrant workers. And like it's not necessarily their fault, but it's because they're all in this cramped like living conditions. Like they're like so cramped in together, right? And they don't necessarily have the money to get like proper property or like live by themselves. I think it's really dangerous, especially when like factories aren't held accountable and when the government doesn't actually like actively go and check on these people. It's dangerous because like these living conditions are a time bomb, and there is an extremely high potential for them to become new clusters and for them to spread it wherever they go, right? So that's something that's really dangerous. And I think like Umar, would you like to extend on this point a bit more?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to living conditions and working conditions, these are the physical spaces that most people find, that they're going to spend most of their time in, and they cannot get out of it because, they require their job, especially when it comes towards this time where people are just like, they need jobs. So people are less likely to quit, people are less likely to, want to unionize and negotiate for certain things because they know they can be laid off, because there'll be other people who are willing to take up those same positions of employment, right? Which means it's necessarily quite hard for people to like, call these institutions out in order to want to like make certain changes. But other than that, I think it's just that even if you are able to have like certain check to make sure that clusters of people can be identified, can be isolated. The way COVID-19 works is that even if you can isolate them, the harms of these things are quite significant. I think it's quite likely that someone gets infected because the scope of your work requires you to travel here and there. So, but even if you can isolate a cluster by that time, most of these people would have already spread it to someone else because of the mobility that they go through, because they have to participate in so many different things. Maybe you have a family, maybe you want to go out to like participate in the economy to buy certain things. So it's definitely quite like certain that you have to spread it to many more people than just what is in your immediate physical cluster.
Yeah, definitely. I actually agree with that. I think like another problem is that actually like the same issue, like like with clusters of migrant workers, getting COVID-19 and spreading it. I think it's already been like a problem in like neighboring countries as well, like for example Singapore, but like our government didn't like necessarily preempt it or take any preemptive measures, like even after seeing these same things happen, right? I think it's dangerous because like they didn't take the measures to screen workers properly, or like make sure they had like proper housing, or make sure they practice social distancing and other stuff, right? I think it's dangerous in the way that it could have been easily preempted and like it could have been easily screened, but like there were no preventative measures like taken until the act was like finally over and like factories were revealed to have these like workers in these conditions, right? So like I think moving on, we're also going to be talking about like kind of bad SOPs, or not necessarily why they're bad, but badly implemented SOPs basically. So Umar, would you like to extend on this point?
Yeah, so I'll begin with certain SOPs that I personally feel like these are certain things which, like, I guess there are arguments for and against them, but certain things don't really have to exist to that extent. I know most people are yearning for the freedom to mobility at these times. I think although you are able to go out, it doesn't necessarily like mean that you should. Okay, what's like? For example, I want to talk about restaurants, and this is an example. I think that people generally make the argument that restaurants should be open and should have like in-person dining. For example, it should. I think in recent times, like in the past few days, for example, when restaurants are opening up, when restaurants allow people to sit like unlimited packs according to the size of the table, when you're allowing people to like come inside the restaurant, like most of these things are seen as necessary for the restaurant to like continue its like to sustain itself economically. But I think there's a few ways to go around this, because number one, like the rise of like software platforms that allow these restaurants to also like maintain themselves online. You can still sell food to things like Food Panda, to Grab Food, means you just won't die off even if you don't you don't open your premises for people to sit in and dine in and eat, right? But also, even if you want to have your thing available for the public to access, you can always just have takeaways. Like, I'm not sure why exactly you need people to sit down there, especially in masses, when you want to remove certain social distancing like measures. Of course, these are seen as like easing into it over time, but I think you are still able to keep most of the benefits that you want to have of restaurants participating in the economy. Not just like, this is just one example, obviously there's much more, but I think this is one that people can easily relate to, and I think it's worth mentioning because it's quite common. So yeah, this is one thing in particular that I think can be handled way better.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. Like, even if there is an argument against that, like, oh, we have to, help the economy, we have to help like restaurants open up because they get more business that way. I think that like that is a point that can be argued in some sense, but like something that really can't be like reasonably argued with is like why people are taking advantage of, like, for example, loopholes in SOPs. Like I believe like some time ago there were like cases of people going to different police office to like try and appeal for like permission to get into different borders, until like even if they got rejected, they would just go like to the next police office over, right? So I think like the mindset that like, oh, if it's not an SOP or if it's a rule, we don't have to care, or like we don't have to follow it necessarily. I think that's like a mindset that is dangerous, because you're more likely find loopholes in law, or you're going to be like complying maliciously, for example. And like a big issue is that enforcement isn't too sure about the SOPs right now as well. There are cases of policemen who like look at like answered citizens with, oh, we're not sure of the SOPs, so we're waiting for the minister's statement, for example, on this. So I think that's kind of something that's dangerous as well, when your law enforcement doesn't have the capacity to like understand the SOPs, or they don't have the news transmitted to them. That's like an example that isn't very good to set for like, you know, regular citizens, and like why should they follow SOPs if our law enforcement doesn't even understand it, right? But like moving on from, you know, these bad SOPs, because we can unpack a lot about that, but I think a big issue is also, you know, the idea of festivals and like, you know, how culturally they're very intertwined with Malaysian culture. Would Umar like to explain this point?
Yeah, so moving on, firstly talk about how inadequate enforcement and implementation of SOPs. Then we're going moving to the second point, which is festivals. So particularly this is important because Malaysia oftentimes is branded as like a melting pot of cultures. We literally have festivals like almost every month, right? The reason why it's important is because the very crux of festivals requires things such as communal gatherings. You want people to come together and celebrate the idea of family, the idea of love, the idea of like light over darkness. These are just some certain tropes that do exist, right? And although we're not saying that these things are bad, I think the way in which people are handling like this time, I think it's problematic. Specifically, it's not entirely their fault because most of the time in which there's a period of 4 months that exists, right? For example, when you have Christmas, Chinese New Year, the New Year's Eve, Deepavali, like these festivals are like compressed into this period where you also saw a huge amount of cases go up. And I think the problem is that most people want to do things, have like parties, want to go out to get certain things, right? Like this is already harmful because most of the time people tend to have an emotional attachment towards these things. They like through intergenerational things. When people have grown up, people don't want to like leave off these cultures. But I do think there are alternatives to, you know, meeting physically and endangering yourself. We're going to look at that later. Zerlynde, you want to talk a bit more about this?
I think you pretty much like covered it with like, you know, the idea of people, like I understand that people want to celebrate these festivals, but I think like, especially since like there are a lot of restrictions that come with that now, I think people have to realize that like, you know, it's something that can wait till next year, or like it's something that can be done once the pandemic is over, right? I think like that's pretty much it we like have to say for our festivals. But I think the third and like, you know, the overarching idea that is a major contender in like why cases are rising is the bad mindset that people have, or like the mindset that isn't necessarily what we would have had a year ago. So like, what do I mean? So this kind of ties back to, you know, the loopholes in law thing and like the mindset of people thinking that if it's not an SOP, it's not important. Like, but in a more general sense, I think, just to put it simply, people don't really care anymore. I think people are desensitized to, you know, how many cases there are each week, like how many cases there are every day. I don't think people care about it as much as they did, you know, last March. Like, so what do I mean by like, I think the broad consensus is that, you know, fear of COVID has generally decreased, even though cases are rapidly increasing. Like, it's even worse than last March when people were out there panic buying. People were out there, you know, staying at home and shutting themselves out, like complete and total isolation. I think that like that mindset hasn't continued on to like this year, right? Like people are not necessarily thinking, oh my god, 200 cases, I better stay in. Like now it's like, even if there's like 2,000 cases, people think, okay, well, at least it wasn't 3,000 cases, right? I think like it's very natural for humans to adapt, and it's natural for people to get used to their situations around them. But I think it's kind of dangerous in a way, like when they get used to this and like they, you know, make reckless decisions, or they take unnecessary steps to actually like do things to avoid SOPs or laws, right? I think that's something that's like really dangerous, I think. What do you think, Umar?
Yeah, so I probably agree with most of that. I think the way in which it works is most people are like adapting towards it. I think the particular use of the term the new normal is also one of the root causes of this, in that when you make people believe that this is a normal that people should like strive to adapt to. I mean, I do understand why people would want to say it, like saying that you need to adapt towards these things. I think, but it's problematic at the point where people are like, you know, I will never get COVID-19, or this is the reality I've been living for the past year. I haven't been able to be like hurt by it because broadly I've had enough information to keep myself safe. I have enough resources to make sure I do not get like infected with it. Like, I think the problem is that when most people are able to justify the things that they do. So this like leads back to festivals and all. So just because there isn't, for example, like an SOP that says that you shouldn't go out, you don't have to have a lockdown to just give the sense that you don't need to go out. So you can just postpone your monthly trip to a cute little cafe in like Mount Kiara and just eat at home. It's okay to do that, because we think even if it isn't a law that says you can't go out, I think most people, it's such a very simple concept to say that just stay at home, because there's no necessity for you to go out, because these are things for leisure. These are not things that are required for you to keep up your like academic livelihoods, right? So I think you do have to make sacrifice. It's unfortunate to say that even if things aren't mandated by law, I think you do have some form of moral obligation to make sure the rest of society is safe as well. And this is one of the ways in which you
and I think that actually like leads really nicely into, you know, the second part of this podcast is, you know, why the situation is not getting better and like what we could do. Obviously cases are decreasing, but like what we could have done to actually make cases decrease more, right? I think like another idea of, you know, like these cafe SOPs, like, oh, like, you know, like people are allowed to dine in restaurants anymore, like they move into, you know, like more questionable SOPs that have recently been stated. So for example, the idea that pubs are allowed to open but they're not allowed to serve alcohol for some reason, you know, more than 2 people per table being allowed, when it was like 2 at first, and then like even before that it was like no dine-in at all, right? And I think like another like something that like really took everyone like off guard was the quarantine exemption for politicians or like people in politics. So they have to quarantine for 3 days instead of 7 days, which is something that I don't know. It's like just because you're a politician, like we all share like, you know, the same body parts, and we all have the same capacity to like catch the virus, right? I think that like just because you're a politician doesn't necessarily mean that you can only quarantine for 3 days and then the virus is not going to care anymore, right? Like, and the worst part is like none of them are vaccinated, and there are like lighter punishments for people in power who break SOPs. So I think like that's a huge problem that needs to be like taken into account as well. And like, what do you think, Umar?
Yeah, so when people aren't just like, part of SOPs is of course the ability for you to enforce it, and obviously we must try to ensure that, you know, the enforcement of these things does happen, that, you know, institutions are accountable when you're going to make sure that certain people are following the duties that they have to do as people who are enforcing the law. But obviously a huge part is the public participation that's required, right? So for example, you scan your My Sejahtera app, even though you might think it's incredibly easy for you to get away with it, just scan the app because you have to do it, right? So although these things may inconvenience you, the fact that everyone else is doing it, firstly, or secondly, it could just lead to a lot more like benefits in terms of contact tracing. All of these things, although you aren't able to see the immediate benefits of it, it's all part of a larger system which is being like established right now, that your small part to play is leading towards a larger network of people being supported by that, right? So of course we should make sure that people are enforcing these laws. Make sure that you and other people around you are also following them. Don't try to exploit loopholes, even though it may be a slight inconvenience. I know these things are like quite common to say, but I think specifically you want to make sure that you are completely following at all times, even if you think you can get away with it. Yeah, maybe you can, but it's just not worth it for you and for everyone involved as well.
Yeah, I think like that's also a major reason why, you know, people aren't necessarily taking it as seriously as they have to, or like they're also like not really like, you know, like feeling the severity of the situation, right? I think the reality is that, you know, this new normal whatsoever, it needs to be part of the culture now. Like we can't keep thinking, oh, weddings or ceremonies, like we're just gonna keep postponing it, like we're just gonna keep postponing it until the virus is over, because it's not going to be over for a long time, and we're gonna feel the effects of the virus for a very long time. I think like we have to break this ideology of like when we can do these things and when will like this entire thing be over, but like how we can adjust our lifestyle and how we can adjust our culture to the virus. So like, for example, you know, having smaller gatherings at weddings. I think both of us are very familiar with somebody who did have a wedding, but like it was a very small crowd. Everybody was tested, like socially distant, and like students were invited into the Zoom. I think Umar might know who I'm referring to. I think like it's things like that actually don't contribute, to people being more likely to break the law because they really, really want to have this wedding and they really postponed it for like a year, right? I think that like when you have the mindset that, oh, we're going to carry on with this virus in a way that it's going to be safe for everyone, that's something that's like most important for the mindset of today, right? And I think what we can do for the future will be, like the last part we'll be talking about. So, what do you think, Umar? Like what can we do in the present that it's actually going to help in the future?
Yeah, so I think firstly it's quite good that certain things have to adapt to like the COVID world, have things online, have a hybrid system of certain things which you've talked about already. Where possible you can have people in there, and then you can also have people who like can't safely participate in these things join online. I think maybe a bit hard to set up at first, but I think with proper like test runs or able to see instances in which other people have done these things, you are able to take advantage of looking and reflecting and seeing how these can be implemented towards the context of what you're trying to do as well. So I think even if you want to hold something that's like really special, and you just don't want to have like a hybrid thing, you don't want to have a small gathering, you really want to have a large gathering, but it's just not allowed. Like, you can either just follow what's already proposed, or the fact that you want to continue doing these things means you're more likely to undermine public efforts in order to get everyone safely vaccinated. You want to get us out of this crisis. Just follow the rules, and maybe in 3 years time you're able to have like a safe large wedding as you would have before. But you doing it right now, maybe it'll bring some happiness to you, but the amount of people you're putting at stake just isn't something that you want to be culpable for. And therefore, just like be patient, follow the guidelines, be a responsible individual. And then so even if you don't want to have these things like online in the short term, make sure you're actively working towards a world in which you're able to have it in the end. And that requires a lot of perseverance, but it's necessary. So
definitely. So what do you think, Umar? Like, what can we do right now to help in the future and like helping cases decrease like right now? Because like we've been just talking about what we could have done in the past, or like criticizing things that have happened in the past. What can we do right now to help?
Yes. So vaccines, we think is everyone's been like talking about it lately. The rollout of these vaccines is going to come out in certain phases. So I think number one, just try to get the vaccine if you can. Encourage other people to do so as well. Just get more information. Be educated as to how you're able to access this vaccine. Secondly, just don't be part of the group of people who wants to be against these vaccines. You're able to look into these things and research as to which is like the best vaccine, for example, comparing certain things. But you shouldn't be at a point where you're actively scrutinizing and you want to not change your mind at all regarding like these vaccines are just like propaganda or like a plan. Like these things, although you may believe it to be true, I think it's actively actively undermining public efforts to get everyone vaccinated. So you are directly causing a lot of people to continue be living in this world that you also don't want to live in, right? So that's already harmful.
Yeah, I think like the fact is that 70% of people, like Malaysian citizens, are going to have to be vaccinated if we want to reach herd immunity. And like the fact is that the vaccine is optional. So if you can, research about the vaccine. If you know people who are worried about the vaccine or scared of the vaccine, educate yourself and let them know what the benefits of the vaccine are and like what the harms are, like, and what precautions are going to be taken to prevent them from happening, right? So I think the phases right now would be frontliners get vaccinated first, then high risk groups, then only teenagers and adults. But I think the second part is that the process is slow, and like we do need better and we need more stable and reasonable SOPs. We don't need SOPs that are going to be changing every 5 days or whatever, right? I think we need more support for students right now. We need more support for healthcare workers. We need more support for low-income groups, like for example the migrant workers from before, right? We need like people to actually go out there, donate, hold their politicians accountable. We need people to actually do these things. So like Umar, do you want to like extend on like what you as an individual can do, like in this.
Yeah. So of course, aside from all the things I mentioned before, like you following the rules, so when it comes to disadvantaged groups not being able to like have enough, it's completely not their fault. So they should be able to get access to resources. So how you're able to do these things is you can actively support like charities that are trying to increase access. For example, you have lots of like organizations that are trying to fundraise for the distribution of like reusable face masks towards like minority groups or like charities or like frontline workers. Like these are people that need your help, and the way which you're able to do this is you can help in the short term by providing these resources which they need, otherwise they are going to be quite devastated, but also make sure that you're able to make your voice heard, that you want to have the government providing access towards these things as well, because it's literally their burden to do so. Once again, just make sure you're able to get these things out, so you're able to have everyone has equal access to like protecting themselves in this pandemic. Make sure you are following the rules. Don't try to find loopholes. Like once again, like my thing is quirky. It's just not like it's just.
It
not,
just isn't.
Right. So, I'm sure the point is made by now.
Yeah, I think like even if you think, oh, like I'm just like one person, right? What can I necessarily do to help COVID? I think you also have to focus more on setting an example for others. You need to, if you see somebody on social media go on a cute cafe day where they aren't, properly following SOPs or they're not wearing masks, you need to call these people out. You need to like whether you DM them or whatever. Like as a student, it is hard to, convince your parents to donate to organizations and stuff like that. But you can contribute to your community in other ways, right? You can, help the old elderly people in your community or like your neighborhood go shopping if they're like afraid to go out and contract the virus. You can, just like make sure that you're like being a model citizen and like staying at home and following all the guidelines set by the government. I think it's just small things like that you do to like help COVID cases decrease, right? And like help create this like community that's going to be better in the long run. So any final thoughts on what we can do, Umar?
Yeah, so conclusively all summed up, it's just that you have to put aside your short-term like emotions, your desire for leisure, entertainment, or just even if you these things have to come at the expense of yourself. It's like quite clear that it has to be a community's like active participation to make sure that these things are able to go through. Even if you are like culturally, you have strong roots in like certain festivals, have alternatives. Like don't try to visit 5 houses, even if you want to like visit one. I mean, it's quite like not hard for you to do so. Look towards alternatives, have Zoom meetings. Like most devices can access this from like a single click. You don't need lots of digital literacy. So we have to find ways to adapt, and the whole idea of the new normal, whether it's something that's good or bad as a term to be used, I think you have to find like your space in this time and make sure that literally your space does not have anyone else in it, because social distancing, but overall it's just make sure that you are actively participating in this. Don't be someone who ruins it for others, because just one person can lead to like huge misfortunes for everyone. So that's all. That's just the final message here.
I think you like wonderfully put it. I think like that's basically our point summarized. Basically what we're saying now is, do what you can, like do your part in the community, and if you can't do that, stay at home. Don't disobey SOPs. Don't do anything like that you think is going to be quirky or funny. Just stay at home and be safe as well. So that's it from us for this episode. I don't have any final thoughts on this topic, but if Umar has anything he would like to share before we reach the end of the podcast, you can say it now.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks everyone for listening. Be a responsible citizen, and we're gonna see you like really, really soon. So don't worry. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share them. We like to engage with the community. We are not we're just doing this thing for like personal gain. It's just to make sure that what you want to see, it will be seen. What you want to hear, we will actively want to hear from you as well. So these things are going to happen. Just keep it coming. Any of your suggestions,
Yep.
whatever. Just anything you want to say.
If you're watching this on YouTube, you can
We'll
use
do
the
that.
comment section and tell us what you think. If you're watching this on Instagram, you can use the shoot us a DM or anything you want. And if you're watching this on Spotify, just go on our Instagram. It's Cempaka Cut without spaces, no caps. And yeah, if that's it, we'll see you next episode and see you.